Think about if you're going to sit in front of a CEO. If you have 5 to 10 minutes to explain your story, how would you do it? That is like the time frame. That is the philosophy that I have when I'm going and speaking with various folks. I've always been a believer in, if you really want to be successful and you want to master your domain, you got to run through the wall. I've seen people run through the wall. I've also seen people try to climb over the wall. And I think if you look at if you juxtapose the both of them, it's usually the ones who really go through it, who are better for it. It's painful, but it's worth it in the end. Really focus on getting it right today. You're not going to get it right today. But if you think about your curve over your personal and professional career, don't do things because other people are doing them. Take the time to figure out along your journey where you want to be and why you want to be there. Don't be afraid to be intellectually insubordinate. And what I mean by that is, when you're an analyst, there's a box, there's a way to act and perform, but don't be afraid to push your associate or push your VP or even push your MD and partner to ask or to think about things differently. Now, there's a time and a place for everything, and there's a level of respect, et cetera. But I think one of, those who I've seen and spoken to, that have been successful are willing to push the envelope and to challenge what run rate or what, most of the people will say is right or wrong. If you think that you're getting paid inadequately, first of all, everyone feels that way. And second of all, you want to be longer term greedy, right? You don't want to just do the mark to market after every year and figure out, okay, I got paid this or I did not get paid that. I think it's really important that at the junior level or at the younger ages in your 20s, it's all about growth and it's all about opportunities. You want to be the person who gets the Friday night call at 7 p.m. where there's an emergency board meeting on Monday for a merger of equal. That is much more beneficial than whatever the economic outcome is for a given year, right? At the junior level in banking, especially at the larger investment banks, there's less of the cold outreach if you're actually there and you're doing the work, there's less of a cold outreach covered nature of the business, right? Usually that's going to go through the VPs, the MDs, the partners, et cetera. But like, for example, where I am, funny enough, coming full circle, having built all of those skills, the networking, the understanding how to work with people, I spend a lot of my time, surprisingly or unsurprisingly, reaching out to folks who may or may not answer me. It's something that you're going to have as in your early 20s, mid 20s and beyond. And, if I'm trying to get in front of an investor that I don't know, I've sent out plenty of cold emails. Do some of them not respond? Sure. Do I then follow up with them a week or two later? Absolutely. Worst case scenario, they don't respond.
Right.
So it's the cross applicability of these skill sets is something that you're going to use into perpetuity. Unfortunately, it was an unfortunate outcome. But with that being said, after there's the mourning period of whatever, a week, 2 weeks, you got to get back on the horse and you got to start dialing for dollars.
Hey guys, welcome back to Elevate and our career discussions. In these types of sessions, we like to feature, exceptional professionals, exceptional stories, and sort of, a platform to learn and get advice from other folks who've been through different points in their career that everyone in the audience can take advantage of. So today we're excited to welcome on Vince Bellino. Vince is not only a close friend of mine, but he's really carved out excellence over his career. Still being really young, and at every place he's sort of been and made a massive impact, and has continues to make a massive impact while building on like all of the skills, right, that we all want to build on, namely being really good at something, building great relationships, and sort of making things better than where they left it. Today's discussion, we're going to focus a lot around, with all of the turbulence going on in the markets, both overall as well as in our own careers. We really wanted to focus this session around resiliency, overcoming failures, branding yourself, rebranding yourself, and then kind of, setting yourself up over the course of your career for success. So we're super excited to have on Vince. Vince, thank you for being on here with us. Would love it if we can start with you just telling our audience about your background and kind of the different points of your journey to date.
Absolutely. Kaushik, thanks for inviting me. Really appreciate the time here. Just to give you a quick background on myself. So originally born in Italy, but grew up in Massachusetts, about 45 minutes north of Boston. Graduated high school in 2010, took a year off, moved to California to pick up tennis. Ultimately moved back to the East Coast, and in 2011 started at Merrimack College. For those who don't know, small liberal arts school. Played 4 years of varsity tennis, finance major, philosophy minor. Had a series of internships, and then upon graduation in 2015, I joined Goldman Sachs in their investment banking division. So the way that the investment bank is bifurcated mainly is between financing and coverage. So the first 2 years I spent in structured finance, so underwriting asset-backed securities, both on an agency and principal basis. And then Goldman came out with a rotation program where they said, if you get promoted after 2 years, then you can rotate within the investment bank. And so I took that opportunity to move over to the classic side, specifically the financial institutions group. So covering banks, specialty finance companies, fintech companies, and towards the end of my time at GS, a little bit of tech. So I rounded out 6 years at Goldman before I joined a fintech company called Pagaya Technologies, dual headquartered in New York City and Tel Aviv, where I sit and I help lead strategy at the company. I've been at Pagaya nearly 2 years. Have watched it and been a part of it starting when it was a privately held business, all the way to leading pre-IPO round, as well as taking the company public back in September of 2021. And so lead a lot of the strategic efforts, whether they be with investors, they be with institutions, they be, and other internal mandates as well. Fortunate to work across the C-suite and the executive team. So I'll pause there, but that's a little bit about myself.
Awesome. Thank you, Vince. Obviously lots to unpack. We're going to go through, your experiences over the course of this conversation. The first area I think we want to start off, talking about, right, is to, we talked about resiliency as being the subject of this conversation. So Vince, would love to hear about sort of a time, or times in your life, right, that you have failed, right, and that's taught you something and had you really introspect and come out, better from that situation. So I know this is a very tough spot, and I think, just in general to talk around failures, but I'd love to start with that, that topic.
Easiest questions first is what I say, huh? So I'd say there's two that come to mind, and I'll bucket them in two different areas. One is a failure back in high school and through the collegiate process, where I would say there was a lack of prioritization on my behalf. And then I would say there's one throughout college where I had a prioritization and I had a view of what I wanted to achieve, but the outcome was suboptimal. So in high school, graduated in 2010, didn't really focus as much on academics. Graduated with mid-twos GPA out of 4.0. I'm sure most of the people listening here immediately are like, holy shit, this guy's a dope. That's okay. All is good. And unfortunately got rejected from every single college that I applied to. And so I kind of knew. And so that for that in and of itself was a failure for me. right? And when all of my peers were going off to great schools and doing what were perceived to be interesting things, and I kind of had to reinvent myself. And, part of the reason why I went to California was because I needed to pick up tennis, because I played 4 years of baseball in high school. And so that is an example of a failure in my mind where I didn't have a priority. I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't know what a GPA was until my junior year. So that's bucket number one. But nonetheless, fortunately, I was able to go to Merrimack College, went on scholarship, and you figured it out there. I'd say failure number two was junior year of college, where, since my freshman year, I had a view that I wanted to get into banking. And I knew that junior year was the most important year to set yourself up for success come graduation. So I was fortunate to get a super day at Goldman Sachs in their sales and trading division. I wanted banking, but sales and trading is great. And just to have an opportunity is all that one can ask for, especially coming from an on-target. So here it is. I fly down. My interview's at 9 a.m. Super nervous. Didn't go to bed till 3 a.m. the night before. Wake up at 6 a.m. I call a cab and I say, hey, I need you to pick me up at 8 a.m. and I need you to drive me to 30 Hudson, which is the Jersey office. I'm in my suit. It's 8 p.m. Interview's at 9. It's a 15-minute drive. 8:15 comes around. It's 20 degrees. I'm in a suit and I'm sweating. And I go back in and I say, hey, and this is before I had I didn't really know, logistically wasn't really focused on, how long does it take to Goldman? How far am I? What's traffic look like? So it's 8:20, 8:30 comes around. I go and I call a cab. Cab rolls up, 8:40, hole in the bottom of the car. I walk in and I say, hey, do you guys take credit? He goes, no, cash only. Starts driving me around to random ATM machines. And I say to him, listen, I have an interview at 30 Hudson, Goldman Sachs at 9 p.m. I need to get there. 5 minutes to 9, I get a call from HCM. They say, hey, by the way, do you know that you have an interview at 9 o'clock? I'm like, yes, I know. And in my mind, this was my moment. This was my moment where I was going to hopefully get an internship and then prove myself beyond there. Show up at 9:20. The guy doesn't let me out the car, so I have to leverage a $200 watch. And I said, pick me up after. I go into the interview. And the way that was set up was you have a first interview in the morning. If you get passed, you'll round out the super day and the rest of in the afternoon. Go in, do the interview. I thought I did pretty good. Turns out I get a call. They say, really appreciate the effort, but unfortunately not going to work for you. So in my mind, that was the biggest failure on my behalf, irrespective of the logistical mishap. And here it was, and I was sitting in January of 2014 with no internships and just complete, I don't want to say despair, but just very, very disappointed, because that was something that I built up for over the previous 3 years for this one event. So that's the second failure.
But in the moment, it's like the worst thing to happen, because in your second example, at least, you have a lot of control, right, Vince, over what you could have happened and what could have happened. And you don't know. I mean, a lot of the interviewers don't tell you what the feedback is, but you can guess that being late to something you would have control over for the most part would have been like a huge reason for that, right? So now let's, obviously, how did that failure, and we'll focus on the Goldman Sachs one, because you ended up eventually, getting a role there and performing exceptionally well there, right? So how did you sort of deal with that failure? How did you sort of use that to refuel yourself? It's hard, right, in the moment, because you feel like you've let something really, tangible go. And look, everyone in our audience, I think failure is tough to talk about. Overcoming failure is hard. And so sort of what are lessons you've learned from that people can take from whatever failures that they've had? It doesn't have to be the exact failure that Vince is talking about, but we all have had things, right, not go the way we wanted when we really wanted something. So how do you overcome that, right, Vince?
So I think a lot of it comes down to mentality, right? You're going to be presented with opportunities. You're going to have a set of skills that you think that you have. You're going to have a set of credentials that you have, but your ability to convert the offer, doesn't matter what it's for, whether it's financial services, banking, private equity, hedge fund, tech, et cetera, really is going to come down to your ability to persevere, right? And your ability to demonstrate to the interviewee what you're bringing to the table. What's your value add? And in the GS situation, as you can imagine, it was an unfortunate outcome. But with that being said, after there's the mourning period of whatever, a week, 2 weeks, You got to get back on the horse and you got to start dialing for dollars. And that's what I did. And so I remember it being February of 2014, and I was supposed to do another sales and trading internship at a middle market boutique bank in Boston. Turns out 5 weeks later, that ended up not working either. And funny enough, I was supposed to go to Italy in May for the month of May, and I had no internship my junior year. So I called the boutique investment bank, PB&W, that I worked for in the fall of my junior year, and I talked to the president. I said, listen, here's the deal. I don't have an internship. I will wash your windows and clean your trash can if you just give me, and you don't have to pay me. I'm going to come and work for you guys. And I was fortunate. I had built a really strong relationship with these folks previously. And, I ended up interning there for the summer, but point being was really important to continue to persevere and to never give up. It's kind of having a refuse to lose mentality. And that's how I think about the world.
Yeah, exactly. Like, do what it takes to get there. And look, a lot of the people in the audience, right, maybe in their jobs now, doing well, right, or going through stressful situations, and maybe they even like, oh, whatever it is, you will deal with failure in life, right? Like, let's say you go on and try to start something entrepreneurial to raise capital, you're going to only be hit with failure, right? Or you're trying to go hire someone for your team, and then like they reject you, or you go and apply to something that you really want to get into and you get rejected. So the takeaway is, regardless of what the failure is and regardless of what vein it is, I think you have to be willing to sort of learn from it and then sort of do what it takes, that mentality, and adapt that mentality of like, look, this is my goal. I'm going to do whatever it takes, and get in front of all the right people, whatever I need to do, and know that if I do it 100 times, once or twice, I'll get lucky. And so that's the amount of work, I think, what Vince is kind of alluding to, that it would take to get back to where you were, right?
And you want to think outside of the box, right? You want to go the extra mile. You want to go the extra step. So if that means combing through 15,000 LinkedIn, depending on where you are, if that means going and combing through 15,000 people on LinkedIn to see who's a CFO, who's a CEO, who's a banker, who's an investor, how do I learn the ecosystem? You should do that. Right. If that means hopping in your car at 2 a.m, which I've done, you hop in the car at 2 a.m, you drive down to the city, you line up 12 hours of meetings and coffees, et cetera. You do that, right? If you really want to, no matter what your goal is, you want to just make sure that you're super laser focused, and you come off and you explain to someone why you're there, what's important to you, what are you trying to learn, and what you're going to bring to the table, because that at the end of the day is going to be the differentiator.
So let me ask you kind of follow up to this, right? Like, like a lot of even our students or undergrads or MBA students or professionals are like, hey, that whole notion, I want to go to New York and I want to set up 12 meetings, right? In the course of this day. Obviously, you can do that, but the fear is you email 50 people and then like 45 of them think that you're kind of this crazy person who's coming out there. So how do you sort of come across, right, in the positive way, such that you don't sacrifice some of your, brand capital?
So I think something that's really important and critical is to be your authentic self, right? And truly show that you're trying to learn, right? Because one of the best methods to learn about a job is to actually speak to the person who's doing the job. And so there's a balance between aggressive versus being less aggressive. But if you can walk the fine line of a quick one-line introduction, where you are, what you're interested in, and why you'd like to learn more about being an investment banking analyst, or being a private equity associate, or being a principal at a growth equity fund, people are more often than not willing and open to have a conversation. So sure, you may fire off 50 emails, and sure, 45 of them may not respond, but that shouldn't hold you back from going and firing off another 50 and keep reaching out.
Right. So basically, and I love that approach, right? Like, what your goal is, which is to go out there and make contact, and whether it takes you 50 or 100 or 200, be true to yourself. Don't be predatory or anything when you're emailing, but be true to yourself. Get out there and go from a humble sort of learning perspective, and also maybe you can add a little bit of value, right? Say, hey, I'm happy to help you, organize sort of anything on our campus, or I'm happy to connect you to, ecosystems within our universities and so on. So maybe add a little bit of value as well, and that's helpful.
And by the way, and Kaushik, if you think about it too, right, at the junior level in banking, especially at the larger investment banks, there's less of the cold outreach from if you're actually there and you're doing the work. There's less of a cold outreach coverage nature of the business, right? Usually that's going to go through the VPs, the MDs, the partners, et cetera. But like, for example, where I am, funny enough, coming full circle, having built all of those skills, the networking, the understanding how to work with people, I spend a lot of my time, surprisingly or unsurprisingly, reaching out to folks who may or may not answer me, right? And so it's not just an exercise that you run when you're an undergrad. It's something that you're going to have as in your early 20s, mid 20s and beyond. And, if I'm trying to get in front of an investor that I don't know, I've sent out plenty of cold emails. Do some of them not respond? Sure. Do I then follow up with them a week or two later? Absolutely. Worst case scenario, they don't respond.
Right.
So it's the cross applicability of these skill sets
Yep.
is something that you're going to use into perpetuity. And you're right? When I go and I speak with someone or I speak with a company, et cetera, not only is it, I want to learn about you. I want to see how we could potentially strategize, potentially partner, do business, you guys invest. It's also, what can I do for you? Okay. You guys are focused within financial services, or you're focused within fintech. Well, I sit in fintech. How can I be helpful? So you really want to look to build a symbiotic relationship, but don't make it transactional.
Right. 100%. I think your first point around the importance of relationship building, networking, connectivity, and building that skill set, it is truly, right, the only and sort of the most important skill set where we will use to the rest of your career, whether you stay in finance, whether you stay in banking and consulting and private equity or otherwise, and or you go up the chain, right? The job of a VP or a principal or an MD is 90% selling / networking and building connections, as is the role of an entrepreneur or a founder or an investor or operator. To be honest, like at that leadership level, a lot of it is bringing people together and getting them to sort of be on your team. So I couldn't agree with that more. And on a side note, which is why we built this networking platform anyway, to allow you all to sort of business develop throughout your career. So now Vince, I love that we started out with failure, because now let's take it a little bit and apply it to the current environment, right? Especially, for our professionals who might be in investment banking or private equity. It's been a tough year, right? 2022 and into 23. And obviously with COVID, personal stuff going on as well, sort of in the business world. Beyond that, there's been sort of, bonuses haven't been as strong, perhaps recently. There's been people, companies, letting people go or not giving as much responsibilities and things like that. So definitely a lot of failures, right, that people might be having, and then applied to even students or, or MBAs or undergrads who are looking to get higher into that market. It's a very tough market to sort of think about. So what is your best advice, right, for someone who's facing this environment? You can tackle hiring, then you could tackle performance, I suppose. And then kind of what are some of these learnings about failure and resilience? How can they be applied, right, to professionals and candidates right now in today's environment?
So yeah, so it's a there's a lot to unpack there. I would say, look, I mean, right now we're operating in a difficult environment, but in many ways, whether that be it takes this macro environment to facilitate some of the outcomes that you described, or it's individuals having failures where they're not getting internships or they're not getting full-time offers or what have you. I think, it's really important to have some perspective, right? And you got to ask yourself, what are you doing and why are you doing it? And because what that'll enable you to do is to keep a long-term, is not to lose sight of your long-term goal or your long-term vision, right? If you think that you're getting paid inadequately, first of all, everyone feels that way. And second of all, you want to be longer term greedy, right? You don't want to just do the mark to market after every year and figure out, okay, I got paid this or I did not get paid that. I think it's really important that at the junior level or at the younger ages in your 20s, it's all about growth and it's all about opportunities. You want to be the person who gets the Friday night call at 7 p.m. where there's an emergency board meeting on Monday for a merger of equal. That is much more beneficial than, whatever the economic outcome is for a given year. Two, if you're in a situation where if you're in a situation with an undesirable outcome and you're looking for new opportunities, take the time to do a level set, right? You want to balance, okay, I need to go find another job versus, okay, I want to really think about what is it that I want? Did I actually like my experience? What are the experiences that I had? What are the qualities that I've built over the last X amount of period of time? And you want to use this opportunity as a level set to then think about, okay, what do I want over the next 6 to 12 to 2 to 3 years? And so what I think you'll find is super important to sharpen your skill sets up front. And with that, if there's ways in which you can think about how to accelerate your career, don't be afraid to look up, don't be afraid to look elsewhere. Meaning, don't be so confined to, okay, if I'm an undergrad and I want to work in investment banking, I need to work at X top 3 investment banks. Well, in this macro environment, there may be a world where you're working at a boutique investment bank, or you're working at, in FP&A at a corporate company. You can still say, I want to still be a banker. It's just, you want to then think about, how do I parlay that skill set to get to the outcome that I want?
Yep. I think that exercise of the first exercise you're talking about, Vince, really great points. You should be doing that regardless of if it's a tough environment or not. Obviously, you're doing that more now, but you should kind of be doing that every 3 months in order to sort of, then have 6 years go by or 10 years go by. And then you're like, hey, am I doing the right thing that I should be doing? I completely agree with you on the other point that your first few years, you really just want to maximize your learning, because later on, right, a lot of times, right, people go for brand names and they go for all these things, but if they're not sort of in a learning group, or if they're just kind of repetitively doing the same thing all the time, doesn't matter if you're working at Goldman Sachs or McKinsey. It's like, okay, well, what are the skill sets you've built? What are the people that what are the deals you've worked on, et cetera? And the third point around being indispensable, I think it adds to your, brand equity, et cetera. So I wouldn't stress too much about sort of some minimal deltas. However, I think if you feel like, what you're doing, is not commensurate to what you're getting, whatever the compensation is for that year, you don't want to look at anything on a year basis, but in kind of a broader theme, and you're not getting those opportunities to step up, and you feel like your growth potential is limited, all these things, then I think you sort of put all these things together. I wouldn't make a decision just on, half a year of bad comp or 1 year of bad comp. I think it's kind of what Vince is also getting at here, especially early in your career. Okay, Vince, now a tougher question, or tougher topic. What if, right, you have been part of a reduction in workforce recently, or, frankly, 2023 looks tough as well, right? So what if that's potentially coming in the future, right? So how do we deal with that? What advice do we have for that?
So first and foremost, I mean, being in a situation like that is unfortunate. It's undesirable. And I don't think no employer takes joy or enjoyment in that. But with that being said, listen, I mean, I think and this is kind of what I had alluded to in one of my stories, there's a mourning period where, everyone has different emotional, feelings, et cetera, with what may or may not have happened. But it's really important to, once you kind of compartmentalize those emotions, I think it's really important to then get back up, step up, and start thinking about, okay, what's next? Right. And you can figure out whatever time period that may take. It may take a week, a month, et cetera. But it's really important to then use that as an opportunity to level set and to say, okay, what is the next step for me? What do I want to do? Do I want to spend my time in the same seat that I was before? Do I want to do something different? And so I think it's really important to then, once you kind of get over that and you identify what are you going after, that's when you start dialing for dollars, right? That's when you get back, go through your network, have conversations with folks. My view is I would be honest, right? I would be forthright, be like, listen, I got blown out. Okay, now what's next? And you want to be constructive, and you want to then best position yourself and reinvent, rebrand, just like, in high school, I had to rebrand myself, and leaving, in the middle of, with GS, I had to rebrand myself. You're going to have to go through that exercise. But every incremental conversation you have, you're going to get better and better at telling your story. And hopefully it'll land you at a place where that is either adequate or your desired outcome. But again, even if that means taking a detour in the middle of then going to whatever job you want, you should do that, or you should heavily think about it, right? No one's life is linear. It's never like this, right? If you asked yourself 5 years ago, Kaushik, where would you be? If you asked Vince, where would you be from 2010 to 2015 to 2020 to 2023? Never, we would have never gotten it right. And that's the beauty of life.
Right. I love that answer. I think then the fallacy is you look at people and say, hey, like, or you think yourself when you're young, or even when you're frankly an associate or VP, you're like, hey, okay, I'm going to spend 3 years as an associate, then I'm going to spend 3 years as a VP. Then, I think it's actually like almost disillusioning yourself a little bit, and to think that that's, and you're almost not opening yourself up for things outside of it. But look, I think Vince, you brought up this rebranding or branding, of yourself, right? As a point, a lot of our folks, right, their brand consists of, right, X university, right, X Goldman Sachs, or, whatever, Moelis, or, whatever firm, McKinsey, or, firm they're at now. Maybe they've come into private equity and that's their brand, right? Or they've done their business school and that's their brand. What do you mean by rebranding? Can you maybe talk a little bit more about, are we talking about certain skill sets? Are we talking about certain relationships? Are we talking about certain industries, right? Like, how does one actively rebrand themselves beyond, right, the brands on their resume, perhaps?
So in my mind, this is an exercise of just re-articulating or reinvigorating your story, right? And so, when I look back to when I was in a super day back in undergrad, I thought I was doing really well. I had probably a couple super days my senior year, and I was going through them and I wasn't getting offers. We could debate what the rationale was for why I was or I was not getting offers, but I kind of took a step back and I said, okay, how do I differentiate myself? How do I explain or articulate my story in a way that's going to connect with prospective employer, prospective partner, potential investor, et cetera? And, I remember specifically saying, okay, at this particular interview, I waited to the end of the interview and I said, you're probably wondering why you should hire a Merrimack College kid. And I said, it's because I'm a wild card. And I said, all of the things that I've done on my resume thus far are going to transcend into my job if you give me the opportunity. Taking that, and a week later I got an offer. Taking that framework and taking that taking the time to rebrand yourself and to re-articulate your story and to reinvent and to take the little data points along the way that make you idiosyncratic, that make you special, is really important. And I would be forward leaning about that. Try to, and this is not only for this is not just for interviewing, this is in general. Think about if you're going to sit in front of a CEO or success, right? If you have 5 to 10 minutes to explain your story, how would you do it? That is like the time frame. That is the philosophy that I have when I'm going and speaking with various folks, because no one wants to hear the same cookie cutter story, right? There's 1,000 of them. Everyone has idiosyncratic stories that they can tell. It just takes some time to walk through them and to piece them together.
Right. The trap is to just let sort of what's on our like firms or whatever's on paper, like define ourselves. Hey, so I've done a lot of, FIG M&A, so must mean I'm a great FIG M&A person and that's all I can do. But I think the way to really do this, the way Vince is talking about it, and obviously from my experiences, is to like go behind that, right? So what about doing this deal made you successful in that? Like, were you really good at sort of the technical details? Like, were you really good at outreaching to a certain person? Were you really good at being responsive on something? Were you really good at identifying trends, right, that the client could not see? And I think that should be part of your brand, right? So not just sort of talk about headline stuff or convince yourself that just because you were in, for instance, Vince, in your case, you were on the deal track, right, kind of at GS for X years, that maybe your skill set isn't in strategy or isn't in this thing that actually is something you're really good at, or business development. So I think it's sort of not perhaps also getting into that trap of just thinking of what you're supposed to be good at versus what you're actually good at or interested in. And I suppose.
And essentially, Kaushik, what you just said is you need to have a healthy dose of introspection, right? And you have to, you know, banking and investing, there's been a pretty proven path of how to be successful in those fields. Being and doing something entrepreneurial or doing something a little bit off the beaten path, there's no blueprint. So, you know, when you kind of when you're sitting in a seat and there's all of, you know, it's greenfield, you also have to have the capability to understand, how do I identify where the next opportunity is and how do I be the agent of change? And in many ways, you know, when I joined Pagaya at the beginning, I was less focused on, there was less of a blueprint of how to execute things. And it was just more about, okay, here's the problem that we're trying to solve. Here's the investors we're trying to go after. How do we differentiate ourselves? And what are the skill sets associated with doing so? It's less about, okay, you know, can you build this model in 2 hours, or can you build this model in 4 hours, or what have you? It's more about like really taking a step back and thinking strategically about what you're doing. And a lot of that came from, fortunately, the training and the experience, et cetera, associated with being at Goldman for 6 years. But in many ways, I mean, we all and you all have, whether it's 1 year to 3 years to 5 years to 7 years, whether it's under one brand or two brand or 5 brands, you got to really think about, what are you extracting from those experiences and how are you going to use that as an agent to change and to be successful in whatever seat that you're going out for next.
Yep. And I think the two things I'll comment to exactly what Vince has said is kind of said it really well. The people that I found to be the most successful in their careers are ones that are introspective about this stuff throughout, and they are focusing on the things that is their unique value prop, right? So if you're really good at something, you over time do that. And the longer it takes for you to figure that out, you're almost doing yourself a disservice by sort of, you know, if you have to start something like when you are, you know, 12 to 15 years into your career, it's a lot harder, even though, you know, not only from an economic perspective, but also from a risk and from sort of a, you know, energy and all of these things perspective. So the sooner you can think about those things, I think the better off you are. And then sort of, I think number two, related to that, it goes back to this failure point, right? Whatever you do, that's going to be off the beaten path. Like, you're not going to be, not everyone here, right? Even if you start in banking and then go to PE or growth and do some whatever, only about 10 to 15% of those people will even make it to principal or partner, right? And any of these different firms or any of these different roles. So it's really on you to be like, hey, most likely I'm not going to stay in this career or stay in this role for the next 10 years. So how quickly can I identify the things that I'm going to be focused on and then kind of act on it, right? So it's kind of Vince's point. And this, unfortunately, is a tough time, but it's a time to sort of, you know, maybe accelerate thinking about that. Related questions, Vince, in this, we talked a little bit about evaluating your career consistently, right? Like every 3 months, every 6 months, but maybe what's a good framework for people to think about how often they should do it? And then sort of what are the lenses they should be doing it under?
So it's going to differ across, everyone's going to have a different perspective. But for me, you know, I like to do a stop, look, and listen between anywhere from 8 to 12 months, right? And what I mean by that is, during that time frame, you want to take the time to reflect on, okay, what is it that I've accomplished and what is it that I want to accomplish? And is the current seat that I'm in and enabling me to do that, right? You may have joined a company where your value attribution was great for the first X amount of years, but the company has grown to such a level where now it requires a different skill set. Not that, and that's not to one's fault, but that means that you have to reevaluate. Is the company where the company is today, and is the seat that I'm in today? Do those align, and what are the experiences that I think I'm going to get? And as long as you're continuing to learn, and as long as you enjoy the people that you work with, really, really important, right? At GS, I was very fortunate to work with a lot of folks that I really enjoy my time with. And here at Pagaya, I'm very fortunate to work with folks who I'm on a daily basis continuing to learn, continuing to understand, et cetera. As long as you have those basic fundamentals, I think, you know, you're doing fine. Now, in terms of how do I think about, or how does one think about a year to 3 years to 5 years? Well, if you're in banking, you're saying to yourself, okay, I'm an analyst. Do I want to be an associate? And what does being an associate mean? If I'm an associate, it's saying, okay, Do I want to be a VP, which means it's a sprint to MD, right? So there's different questions that you have to be asking yourself, but the fundamental framework doesn't really change. And ultimately, we're all looking to live fulfilling lives. Don't put yourself in a position where you're not doing that just because Wall Street tells you, or because big tech or whatever, right? There's already social structures in place. Don't necessarily feel that you have to follow them because someone else did. Feel free to go down the beaten path and to do something different, but have the confidence in yourself that you're going to get there and be successful, even if failures come along the way.
Yep. And these frameworks and sort of these positions and all that are in some ways credentializing for a lot of people, but what's truly credentializing is like doing something and actually executing on that, right? So at some point, let's say, you go and start your own fund, or you go and start your own company or whatever. Yes, it's going to matter that you're ex Goldman or ex, whatever university, but what's going to matter even more, right, in a year is like how well that fund does, or how well sort of that venture does. And so it's really about alignment of what you're talking about, right? It's like, until you're sort of building that skill sets, et cetera. And then when you do go off the beaten path, it's setting yourself up to be successful in something, and then being okay with failure, right? Back to that original concept that we had of kind of coming back to that. Okay, so like, a good portion of the audience, right, is sort of in their 20s, like early to mid 20s, late 20s. What are the things then they should be focused on in that time period, in terms of getting better at building skill sets? We touched some of these things, but if you were to give sort of, hey, here are the, X number of things I want people to build, what would they be?
So definitely at the junior level, learn the technicals. And that's not even just in finance. Like I'm sure there's always a technical aspect of any of these domains. So make sure you understand the technicals, you master the technicals, because that's going to prove to be table stakes in the future. You need to build the building blocks. And, going through some of these training programs and going to some of these companies, facilitate that. Super important. 2 is have a great attitude, right? You're going to be get comfortable with the undesirable, right? Don't be too quick to write off an experience because you're going through a bad patch of time, right? All these jobs are difficult, and they're stressful, and they could be anxiety inducing, depending on the person. But if you keep a level head and you keep a level of optimism, which all comes down to having a good attitude, all will be okay. I think 3 is perseverance, right? You want to work really hard, and you want people to recognize that, hey, I'm putting Vince on this team because I know that this guy is going to go the distance and he's going to work double the amount that the next person is. Like, take pride in yourself, right? Because at the end of the day, everyone walks around with their own brand, and it takes a lifetime to build reputation, and it takes a day or even quicker than that to lose it. So take pride in yourself. And lastly, belong yourself, or said differently, believe in yourself. There's always going to be no's. There's always going to be doors shut in your face. You may not get the deal that you want. You may go a year without doing a deal. But once you get that opportunity, use that opportunity to prove yourself. And a lot of that, and if you pull all that together, that's, I don't know, 5 to 7 or 8 years of experience. And, hopefully you have some fun along the way.
Right. I think spot on. I think, building a skill set, having the great attitude, and like persevering through things, and obviously building, taking that pride, and then sort of the belief and brand it of yourself. And maybe, 1 or 2 things related that I'd add to that is, you want to work on things, you always want to, there's got to be some metrics of what you're working on, right? So you're either learning a lot, right? You're working on really cool problems, you're having a ton of impact, you are, you're being appreciated, right? And sort of you are building something that you want to build, right? So those are sort of general metrics, right? These things have to tick off like 3 or 4 things. And it's not always going to be 5 out of 5, but, I think, and all of that you get to determine. I think that's the coolest thing about life, right? When I say, hey, you should have an impact, my definition of impact is going to be different for Vince defines it, and where Sarah or someone else is defining it, right? So make sure that you're not just talking about impact, like, oh, of course I'm having an impact. Like I work at an NGO, or of course I'm having an impact. I'm helping, Fortune 500 companies like solve their most complex problems. But is that how you define impact? Like, do you want impact to be like making the most money you can? Do you want impact to be like, advising 50% of the Fortune 500? Whatever it is that you're defining for yourself, make sure you got to bring it back to yourself, which is why introspection and sort of the answers that's for you or for Vince or for me is going to be different from it's going to be for someone else, right? So I think just kind of putting it all together, right, Vince?
And I think, Kaushik, one more point to add is I wouldn't be where I am if I wasn't fortunate to have the mentors and the folks who really helped me out. And that's starting all the way back when I was in high school, right? I mean, I've been very fortunate to have had people to take the time and the effort to help me grow and help me be introspective. So with that being said, for those out there as well, it's never too young to start giving back and to start being a mentor, right? Because there's going to be other folks who either have a similar background or who have a completely different background, and everyone generally goes through the same struggles. They may manifest themselves in different ways, but it's really important to be there for someone if they are in a situation where they're having a tough time, or they were unfortunately let go, or they don't like their career, they don't like what they're doing, or their internship wasn't what they thought it would be. Like providing perspective and providing, being a soundboard is just as important as the one who's receiving it.
100%. I think on that point, it's often like the toughest to do that when someone's struggling, right? So if someone's been let go or someone sort of is having a tough time, but the amount of impact that could have is multiples, right, of what could have had when everything's going well. So definitely, I think this mentorship point gets back into just generally, right, thinking of other people other than ourselves, right? I think we get really, really focused on what's my bonus, what's my sort of, bucketing, my ranking, what's my career path, et cetera. But the world is way bigger than any one of us individually. The world's way bigger than any single firm, right? That we work for and so on. So just knowing that, that is what's going to, at the end of the day, carry you. And frankly, like, it goes back to the whole concept on like networking and mentorship and stuff. So I couldn't agree more. And frankly, Vince, this is why, we want to thank you from our platform for doing that and sort of having, built, your own set of, principles and having sort of your own set of experiences and being able to share that. And part of our platform, right, is to institutionalize this, where we bring back a lot of amazing professionals who've achieved excellence in different things, such that others can learn from them and eventually sort of give back. So I couldn't agree more. It's sort of full circle. And then sort of let's maybe pivot to a little bit more of a, positive note here. So we talked a lot about failure. Now let's talk about ways to measure success, right? So how, it's hard sometimes, right? With some of us might think when we're young, you measure success by how much money you make, right? Or you think about how much power you might have, or we think about seniority of levels, how many people we manage, right? Or, how much, how our name is in the news, right? Or how much, credibility or how many followers we have, or whatever it is, right? So what are some frameworks of measuring success? And then what are like the qualities, right, of people that achieve success in these different domains?
So, I mean, I think it comes in you have different boxes, right? In undergrad, you can make the argument that graduating summa cum laude, and if you play a sport, being, starting on a varsity team, or, if you're at a club, you're the president of the club. Like, those are all of the obvious benchmarks. But one that I think is actually pretty important outside of that is kind of goes back to the network, right? It's, can you pick up the phone and call XYZ person and them feel comfortable to underwrite you? Are they going to go and recommend you for a job, to sit on the board, to do a certain task? Because what that really does is that shows the market in a very public way what they think of you. In banking, as a first year or a second year, as an associate, like, yes, everyone gets compartmentalized into quartiles, or depending on how it is. By the way, full disclosure, first year, I was bottom bucket. I was not good, right? But I use that because I celebrate my wins and I celebrate my losses, because they're both equally important. And so, of course, everyone wants to strive to be the outperformer and to be the best. But it's really important to recognize and to realize it may not happen day one. It may take a year, 2 years, 5 years, 6 years to materialize itself. But along the way, hopefully you've gained enough experience and had enough touch points to kind of understand how the ecosystem works. And ultimately, the best, most gratifying way in my mind, I mean, put the economics outside, is when you get the call mid-November, Saturday morning from your VP, and he's like, hey, we have a deal closing on December 31st. Are you in or are you out? And I say I'm in, even if I'm already getting totally crushed on something else, because that is the best way for one to show that they're in demand. And the reason why they're in demand is because you're doing good work. It's a similar way, even in the seat that I sit in when I'm tasked on going and working on some of the most strategic pieces to enable the business. That is a testament of my CEO or folks in the executive team where they're saying Vince is doing a good job. And that has nothing to do with economics. That has all to do with the experience, how you think about the world, and your ability to execute when you're put in a position. And I'd say last piece, don't be afraid to be intellectually insubordinate. And what I mean by that is when you're an analyst, there's a box, there's a way to act and perform, but don't be afraid to push your associate or push your VP or even push your MD and partner to ask or to think about things differently. Now, there's a time and a place for everything, and there's a level of respect, et cetera. But I think one of, those who I've seen and spoken to, that have been successful are willing to push the envelope and to challenge what run rate or what, most of the people will say is right or wrong.
On that point, I think, obviously, right, the work is stressful, right? Like in a lot of these careers and finance careers or consulting or, I would say banking, consulting, PE, investing, et cetera, hedge funds, et cetera. It's also stressful as you get more senior, right? So now you're supposed to bring in business and now, you're doing all this. So on the same vein of sort of success, right? Like any comments on achieving sort of balance? You talked about a little bit about pushing back, sort of not breaking past your own limits and so how do you do that effectively and such that it doesn't impact your own brand and reputation? How do you think about balance? How do you think about setting sort of boundaries and how do you think about not burning yourself out? I think is where I'm getting at.
So it's really important to understand yourself. This comes back to introspection and being truthful with yourself. My level of tolerance for stress or anxiety could be different from yours, Kaushik, and is going to be different from the next 50 to 100 people. And so understanding, okay, can I actually do this? If I take on this incremental project, can I do it and be successful? And will my output continue to be, for me, will it continue to be top performing? Or is this going to be something where it's going to bury me? I've always been a believer. And if you really want to be successful and you want to master your domain, you got to run through the wall. I've seen people run through the wall. I've also seen people try to climb over the wall. And I think if you juxtapose the both of them, it's usually the ones who really go through it, who are better for it. It's painful, but it's worth it in the end. In these jobs, it requires a lot. It requires a sacrifice. But with that sacrifice comes opportunity. And over time, it may not be, in your junior years, and it may take more time, but you will then find the balance that best fits you. And if it means you want to make it and you want to go be a managing director or a partner in banking, or you want to be a principal, or you want to be a managing partner in investing, or you want to be in the public market, you will figure it out over time. And you will figure out, okay, if I continue doing this, what is the reverberation on my personal life, my professional life, where am I going to be spending my time, et cetera. So it's going to be different for everyone, but it's important to figure it out. And it's important to draw a line. When you don't feel like you can do it, or you're not going to be able to perform at the level that you would like to perform, raise your hand.
Right.
So, but a lot of this comes to understanding the dynamics, understanding the boundaries, et cetera. And at the end of the day, you want to continue to perform well.
Yep. Amazing. I completely agree. And I think to add on to all the points you mentioned are so spot on. And I'll just add one thing in that life and careers are sometimes, unless we do the introspection and unless we're like really aligned, and it's going to change, right? Or we have long careers. You know, it's crazy. We think that what we do in your early 20s or mid 20s or late 20s is going to define you. But guess what? That's just like, 1/6 of like, or 1/5 of your career, right? I think what I was getting at is like, oftentimes it's about like grass is sometimes, usually, or for most people, grass is greener on the other side, or you want something you don't have already. Like you're always aspirational about something. And then once you get it, you don't want it anymore, right? And this is sort of how life works. And this is how human nature works. I think really the only, or the best anecdote to that, to be honest, is a lot of stuff we've discussed already, is that introspection. Like if you're doing things you really like, and like even the bad part about your job, you're okay to do because you like the good part so much and all of that, then that's when you start going away from the notion of, I want to do something else. And then once you do that something else, you don't want to do it anymore, right? So that the healthy way to go about this is that introspection, finding out the things that you want to do. Amazing. So like, obviously we've been through a lot of topics here today, Vince. Like, first of all, I think amazing overview of sort of all of these different tough topics in my mind, right? Resiliency, failures, and through example, learning from those, getting better at them, or getting better at whatever you're getting at, or changing your mindset around what you want to focus on, then navigating the tough environment that we've faced already in 22 and then now into 23 that we're probably going to have, the introspection that it requires, then doing the hard work, right? And then the network side, and then finally touching on success, right? We talked about a lot of different topics. And so I'll let you, first of all, thanks for doing this. I think this is like one of the coolest, sort of most introspective discussions, right, that we've had on this platform recently. I'll give you the forum for any sort of parting words, right? In terms of, we have an audience of amazing students. We have an amazing sort of grad students. We have amazing professionals, and frankly, even people that are senior in their career. Let's say each of them has a 5-year mindset or 3-year, 10-year mindset. What is maybe your parting advice, right, to people there on how to achieve their goals and while still staying in the present moment and excelling at what they're doing?
So definitely, and again, thanks for taking the time here. So look, I think first and foremost is be patient. Nothing happens overnight. And really focus on getting it right today. You're not going to get it right today. But if you think about your curve over your personal and professional career, don't do things because other people are doing them. Take the time to figure out along your journey where you want to be and why you want to be there. And have some fun along the way. My grandmother has this great saying that, I have in the back of my mind always. It's Avanti, Avanti in Italian, which is keep moving forward, onward. And in moments of duress and in moments of stress, onward and upward. And in moments of, when things are going well, et cetera, still onward and upward.
Right.
And as long as you stay true to yourself, in my mind, that's all that matters.
Yeah. Great.
You can
I love that. Yeah.
There's this good poem. It's called The Man in the Glass. And it essentially encapsulates, you can lie to your friends, you can lie to the world, you can lie to your family, all you want. But at the end of the day, it's the man in the glass is that only thing that counts. And what does that really mean? That means you are the one who has to go to bed at night. It's you yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So feel good about that.
Yep. Amazing. Well, I have nothing else to say. I think we're gonna have to title this thing "Onward and Upward," or Avanti, Avanti. But no, first of all, thanks, Vince, for spending this time with us. This is incredibly insightful, incredibly introspective, and frankly bare, right, in some sense. So we appreciate it. I appreciate it. And yeah, I look forward to this sort of helping lots and lots of people, right, get through tough times that they're going through, career, life, whatever it is, and then come out of it stronger, and frankly maybe do things that they otherwise would have been reluctant to do or be afraid to do, and then instead sort of give them power to do it, because you don't have this sort of golden handcuffs sometimes to do this. So again, thank you, Vince. Really appreciate it. I think we all do, and we can't wait to sort of do more of these on maybe more cheery topics in the future. So thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Kajik.